بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد. Today inshallah we'll do an introduction to our new lesson in the explanation of the text كشف الشبهات, which translates to removal of doubts. كشف الشبهات, removal of doubts by Shaykh Islam Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhaab rahimahullah. And this text in reality is the final text in a series of books of Tawheed written by the same author, and you may even argue that it is a summation. It is the completion of this series of texts which, by Allah's permission and bounty, we were able to go through quite a bit of them. Most notably, we completed Kitab al-Tawheed in about a year study, and now inshallah we will embark on this text. If you look carefully at Shaykh Islam rahimahullah's work, you see that it's a progression. He begins his writings and his treatise from very simplistic and clear text to something more complicated and more difficult. So the initial study of his series of work begins with his work Nawaqid al-Islam. Nawaqid al-Islam is the nullifiers of al-Islam. 10 articles, 10 points that someone must be careful in order to protect their faith. And then he gives attention to another text referred to as the 6 principles, Usul al-Sitta. And then another text, Thalathatul Usul, or before that, Qawa'id al-Arba'a, the 4 principles. And then the 3 principles, and then Kitab al-Tawheed, and this one. And so many of us, alhamdulillah, we had some opportunity to sit down and study these texts from beginning to end. And perhaps for some of us, it's the first time studying Tawheed and Shirk in more detail. Nonetheless, everyone can benefit from such a class. But it's highly advised that someone, if they're studying Tawheed in detail, that they begin in this particular manner, that they begin with the smaller works before they reach this text, or they do it on their own time, so they can fill in the gaps. Because this text that we're studying here, Kashf Shubuhat, in reality, Shaykh al-Islam is tackling the doubts presented by the people who promote and support polytheism, shirk. And so in reality, he's not going to emphasize in the details the same way he did in Kitab al-Tawheed for the basis of truth. Yes, you might argue the majority of the book, like maybe a good portion of the beginning, is all about principles, about Tawheed and messengership, and then he tackles the doubts. But if someone which wants to truly appreciate the text, they need to go back and read some of his other texts. The title of the book, and we just want to say today we're just doing a muqaddimah, introduction, so you have to be patient with me as we go through different names and different texts and different things, because every time you embark on a study of a text, it's very important you have the muqaddimat. You need to have the introductory knowledge about why was the book written, when was it written, what's the purpose of the book, etc. So we begin first with the name of the book. In Arabic, Kashf al-Shubuhat. In English, removal of doubts. Now this name, Kashf al-Shubuhat, has been given by a number of scholars in reference to the text. You see, there are some Islamic texts where the name of the book is not actually affirmed from the author himself. But as for this particular text, then a number of scholars have actually referred to it as removal of doubts. Now that might sound strange because someone may say, well, what's the benefit of knowing the name of the text? Well, some texts have different names. And sometimes some texts have no name. And simply a scholar came later and referred to it as a particular text. So the one we're reading is called Kashf Shubuhat, and is referred to that by a number of scholars. For example, Shaykh Sulaymaan bin Abdullah bin Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhaab, the grandson of the Shaykh, he died 1233 Hijri. He referred to this book as Kashf al-Shubuhat, the removal of doubts. And he has a book on Tawheed, which he explains Kitab Tawheed, and it's a tremendous book. It's called Taysir al-Aziz al-Hamid. It is by far the biggest explanation of Kitab Tawheed. Right? We're talking upwards of 1,000 pages. So even though the book Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen we read is quite long, His is amongst the longest. And of course, he's the grandson of the Shaykh, so he explained the book in detail. Likewise, another scholar named Shaykh Abdul Bin Hassan al-Shaykh. Again, these are the grandsons of the Shaykh. He also refers to this text as Kashf al-Shubuhat, as found in the book Majmu' al-Rasail wal-Masail al-Najdiyya, volume 4, page 415 to 416. Who is Abdul bin Hassan al-Shaykh? That is the grandson of the Shaykh. Not just grandson, maybe the grand-grandson. A little bit down the line. But nonetheless, Shaykh Abdul Rahman, he is known for his explanation of Kitab al-Tawheed, Fathul Majid. Many of you probably heard this book before, or the name, Fathul Majid, Sharh Kitab al-Tawheed. It is probably the most notable or the most praiseworthy explanations of Kitab al-Tawheed. Likewise, the Arabian historian Uthman bin Bishr, even also just named or known as Ibn Bishr, he has a book where he talks about the scholars in the history of the Najd area. When we say Najd, we're referring to the area in Saudi Arabia now occupied by the capital Riyadh. And that area is called Najd, and that area is where Shaykh al-Islam rahimahullah, he established his da'wah primarily and prominently. So Ibn Bishr, this historian, he died 1290 Hijri. He actually also referred to the book as Kashf al-Shubuhat. And this is important because these scholars are direct authorities in relation to the works of the Shaykh. Had it been, for example, someone else said this, it may be disputable. But when the scholars closest to him, and those who are considered authorities in that particular field, then their word actually counts. It's very important when it comes to researching Islam and Islamic knowledge, we must make sure that we're taking the sources from those who are closest or those who are most reliable in that particular field. Ibn Bishr, he died 1290 Hijri, we said, and he wrote this in his book Unwan al-Majd fi Tarikh al-Najd, page 185. So it's important to remember that name, Ibn Bishr. And whenever someone talks about Shaykh al-Islam Muhammad Abdul Wahhab, and sometimes you may hear a lot of negative criticism, and you might hear propaganda and fabrication, as we mentioned in our other lessons, terms like Wahhabiyya, Wahhabism, right? Terms that don't have any validity in the Islamic world or in Islamic tradition and scholarship. Go back to these works of the earlier scholars who actually documented the da'wah of Shaykh al-Islam and see what the reality really is. So if you remember Ibn Bishr, that's an important name when it comes to knowing about Shaykh al-Islam rahimahullah's biography and his life. Right? It's important we don't take our resources from those who are not authorities. Another name which is also important, Hussein bin Ghannam, also known as Ibn Ghannam. Ibn Ghannam is another authority. He's a historian. Died 1225 Hijri. He calls the book likewise Kashf al-Shubuhat, and he wrote a book which is very important called Tarikh al-Najd. Tarikh al-Najd. And Tarikh al-Najd is pretty much the history of Najd. In there he documents year after year what has happened in that region. So he goes from before Shaykh al-Islam rahimahullah and until his death and after. So two names is important for us to remember from this introduction, Ibn Bishr and Ibn Ghannam. It's important because when you want to study about particular people in history, you need to know the historians. We all know Hafid Ibn Kathir rahimahullah. Ibn Kathir came much before Shaykh al-Islam Muhammad Wahhab, right? So we can't find his biography in his works. But if you go to these two scholars, you find credible accounts of what Shaykh al-Islam was really up to. What was his da'wah about? What did he write about? How did the people portray him and also receive his da'wah? And a number of the scholars refer to the book as Kashf al-Shubuhat. So we can conclude in the beginning, the name of the book is Kashf al-Shubuhat, Removal of the Doubts. And there seems to be little dispute regarding that. As for the subject matter, then what is this book about? Well, this book is actually about doubts surrounding shirk and tawheed. So really, it's about the doubts people present as a way to promote or protect or to advocate for shirk. And when we say people, we're talking about the people within Islam. It's not the polytheists like the Quraysh and those who came after them. We're talking about Muslims who they have with them doubts, and in what they're actually advocating is actually shirk, but they think it otherwise. So Kashf Shubuhat in reality is a book where Shaykh al-Islam, he clarifies truth from falsehood. He teaches us what true tawheed is, And it teaches us how to respond to the misguidance or the doubts of people who raise these certain doubts. Ibn Ghannam, rahimahullah, he said in relation to this book, the Shaykh, may Allah have mercy upon him, min Shaykh al-Islam Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhaab, he wrote a treatise for the general body of the Muslims. Okay, this book is for Ammat al-Muslimin. And he called it Removal of Doubts, answering many of their, means that the opponents or the propagators of shirk, answering many of their doubts which they spread and mention in their books. So Ibn Ghannam, he tells us that the book is about exposing the truth against these doubts. How do we challenge or how do we counter certain doubts? And we'll talk about some examples later. A contemporary scholar, Shaykh Salih bin Abdul Aziz al-Shaykh, and you probably heard now a lot of the name Shaykh or al-Shaykh. And some of you probably wonder, what does al-Shaykh mean? Al-Shaykh, it means the family of the Shaykh. Al in Arabic means family or household. Shaykh is who? Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhaab. So we're talking about these are descendants. So the term al-Shaykh, whenever you hear it, it's a term for a household. These are the descendants of Shaykh al-Islam Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhaab. So of our time, the contemporary scholar, Shaykh Salih bin Abdul Aziz al-Shaykh in Saudi Arabia, who's one of those who is responsible for education in Saudi Arabia over the country, and a major and senior scholar. He says, in relation to why he wrote this book, because somebody may ask, why was Shaykh al-Islam writing a book like this after he's already taught people Tawheed? Just as a short point, some people might not be familiar with it, but Shaykh al-Islam's style of da'wah was that he would often and always begin teaching people Tawheed before he would teach them about shirk and refute or encounter the shirk. So the shirk that was rampant in his time period, he would first teach them Tawheed, then teach them the shirk and clarify the two. So someone may ask, well, then why is he writing books like this if he wrote Kitab al-Tawheed? And Kitab al-Tawheed is a tremendous book, clarifying Tawheed into all of its evidences. Well, there are people who obviously didn't read those books, or they had with them their own arguments or their own opinions. So in order to challenge that, he needed to write a book in order to dispel these doubts. So he says, Shaykh Salih al-Shaykh, this treatise is called Kashf al-Shubuhat, and a group of the scholars mentioned, from them Ibn Ghannam, in his Tarikh al-Najd, that the Imam Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhaab, he sent the book to the people in the villages in order to remove some of the doubts against Tawheed which the enemies of the da'wah of the Imam have mentioned. Sharh Kashf al-Shubuhat, page 31. What he intends by this is that in reality, Shaykh al-Islam rahimahullah, when he wrote this treatise, he sent it to the people of his land, in his own vicinity, in order that the book become widespread. So it is in many ways a treatise. And that's why if you ever looked at the Arabic copy of it, you see that it's not very long compared to Kitab al-Tawheed, maybe the fraction of the size, but it was sent to all of these different cities or villages in order for them to have the doubts dispelled. Now, Shaykh al-Islam rahimahullah, when his da'wah was becoming prevalent and prominent towards Tawheed, there were certain people who had other opinions about it. They didn't agree with him for a number of reasons. Some of them had to do with their own inclination towards these things, like misguidance of calling upon the dead or the saints, or their own misguided use of evidences. And some of them may not have been knowledgeable, like lay folk or laity. So Shaykh al-Islam rahimahullah, he had some opponents in his own lifetime before he passed away. But the majority of the people, means the people in his vicinity, in his country, were in support of his da'wah. And this is important. It's not as some people they make, that Shaykh al-Islam rahimahullah, when his da'wah became prominent, he was a minority. Yes, in the beginning stages, he was ousted from a number of different regions because people were hostile towards Tawheed. The same way Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam likewise. But when the Tawheed, it became firm in the land, the people who are against him are very little. So why did Shaykh al-Islam rahimahullah write this work? Who is it directed to? Some scholars, they say, there was one Imam in his time who actually was spreading doubts, and Shaykh al-Islam therefore had to write a particular book in order to challenge it. Means Kashf al-Shubuhat comes as a product, as a refutation to doubt spread by a particular individual. And this individual, his name was Shaykh Muhammad bin Abdullah bin Fayruz al-Ahsa'i, or for short, Ibn Fayruz. And Ibn Fayruz, he died 1216 Hijri, 10 years after Shaykh al-Islam Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab. Shaykh al-Islam died 1206. He died 1216. Ibn Fayruz, interesting enough, he was actually at one point someone who met Shaykh al-Islam, and in fact Shaykh al-Islam actually studied with him in the beginning stages of his study, and upon which Shaykh al-Islam Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab praised Ibn Fayruz. But later on, when his da'wah became prevalent and prominent, Ibn Fayruz began to attack the da'wah and raise doubts in support of shirk. So it's important to take a look at that, because some people may come and say that Shaykh al-Islam praised Ibn Fayruz. Yes, qabl da'wah, before the da'wah, but afterwards there was a problem. And why was Ibn Fayruz bothered by the teachings of Shaykh al-Islam? It's because he himself had his own misunderstandings, that he thought some of these things that he's teaching are not correct. And when you read the book, you start to see how the answer or the correct opinions are with Shaykh al-Islam. So Ibn Fayruz, some scholars say it was him who actually was spreading the doubts, in which then Kashf al-Shubuhat became the reply. One scholar, his name is Shaykh Abdullah bin Abdul Rahman al-Bassam. Shaykh Abdullah al-Bassam. Many of us are familiar with Shaykh Abdul Rahman al-Sa'di. This is his student. Shaykh Bassam is the one who wrote the commentary to Umdatul Ahkam and Bulugh al-Maram. He says, Muhammad bin Abdullah bin Fayruz al-Najdi in origin, then Ahsa'i in birth and upbringing, which is another region in Saudi Arabia. He is the one who sent the doubts which the Shaykh refuted in his treatise Kashf al-Shubuhat. So now we take a benefit that when you read the book, some of the doubts that are actually mentioned are not small doubts. They might be a little bit intricate. So now we can understand why there is some type of complexity to the doubts, because it came from another Shaykh who had some misguidance with him. And this was mentioned by him in Ulama al-Najd, Khilal al-Thamani Qurun. There's a book by Shaykh al-Bassam, it's called The Scholars of Najd Through 8 Generations. Volume 1, page 143. And again, this kind of work is helpful, because next time someone was talking to you about Wahhabiyya and Wahhabism, you take him to these works and say, let's find out what the scholars in the region were speaking about Shaykh al-Islam. What were they saying? And just as a side note, there is no term Wahhabi or Wahhabism known in Islam. Right? It's not a term that's known in Islam. It's a term that came from outside of Islam. In terms of the subject matter, Shaykh al-Islam rahimahullah, he said, was addressing doubts. And in particular, he was addressing about 15 doubts. So about 15 doubts he mentions in the book, to which he responds to. And the beauty of this book isn't that he answers 15 doubts. The beauty is that he teaches you how to answer every single doubt that ever will come. He teaches you a methodology to responding to doubts. It's very important. That's why this book, some scholars say, is indispensable that a Muslim study this book. Because it's not about the 15 doubts that he takes one by one and brings evidences for and against and has a munaqasha discussion. It's about the methodology. How do you deal with doubts? So for example, here we are in a university campus. Somebody may raise doubts about Islam. They may even have evidence. They say, Allah says in the Quran. And then you may say, I don't know how to answer this. Because when someone says it's in the Quran, that's like, for some of us, it's checkmate. It's in the Quran. What can I say now? It's in the Quran. But that's not good enough. Because as a Muslim, we know, just because something's in the Quran doesn't mean the understanding is correct. And just because something's in the Hadith doesn't mean it's authentic. So Shaykh al-Islam, he teaches you a methodology. To give you a glimpse of this, I'm going to read one part where the Shaykh he mentions a benefit. And it's a tremendous one, and one that shows you in reality doubts have a particular way to be answered. Some people, when they hear doubts and they're mentioned to them, they get very flustered. But when you look at the principles the Shaykh teaches us here, you see that it's not that difficult once you know how to go about it. So inshallah we'll mention example of one. For those of us who are inshallah, I'll be studying this text. There is an English translation of the work. It's one available online. It's a PDF if someone wants just the plain text. But if someone wants the commentary, then we will be using the commentary of Shaykh Muhammad bin Salih Al-Uthaymeen. It's available for purchase online. And this is the same author whose explanation we used in Kitab al-Tawheed. So it's important that we will use the same Shaykh for simplicity and ease. So inshallah, we'll mention just an example of this. Just give me one moment to pull it out. So he says, the Shaykh al-Islam rahimahullah, this is an example of a methodology. It's on page 48. So a person of falsehood cannot present any argument except that there is in the Quran that which refutes it and clarifies its fallacy. As Allah says, and they did not come to you with an example except we bring you the truth and the best of explanation. So one of the methodologies to refuting doubts is that whatever doubt somebody brings or evidence, that same evidence is a refutation of that same doubt. Whoever brings you something in the Quran that says it's against Islam, that same ayah or hadith is evidence for Islam. But the person who quoted did not understand. And so that's actually a principle Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen rahimahullah mentions. And we're going to get there. And this is where Muhammad Abdul Wahhab got these points from. And so Shaykh al-Islam, some people always wonder, where did he benefit? Who did he get inspired by? Most of his writings, you see that he's inspired by the two great Imams, Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah and Imam Ibn Qayyim, rahimahumullah. So that's one benefit that helps us. So next time someone tells you it's in the Quran, you just tell them, can you give me the ayah number? And then when you read the ayah, you'll see that it's actually a response to that very doubt the person said. Right? That it makes our life a lot easier. And this doesn't mean that every single doubt can be replied just by that alone, but it's one of the major principles. So Shaykh al-Islam, dealing with these 15 doubts, he teaches us a methodology. And the scholars therefore have high praise for this book. Because of this, they have high praise for the book. Its status is considered tremendous. So for example, some scholars, they mention that this book is probably the most important book Shaykh al-Islam has written. Some of them have said this is the most important, or from the most important, because of what it does for the ummah. It gives us a methodology. Others have said, like Shaykh Abdul Razak al-Afifi, rahimahullah, contemporary scholar of our time, Kashf al-Shubuhat is a small treatise in size. However, it is the most difficult books of Shaykh al-Islam Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab. It is the most difficult of his books. Why? Because he talks about issues that can remove someone from Tawheed. So that's why it's a tricky book if you don't know much about Tawheed, in that you may read the book and some points are not clear to you why they're wrong. Because the doubts usually come and you have to have some basis of knowledge to respond to them. But like as we mentioned, if someone doesn't have a background of the other works of Shaykh al-Islam, inshallah we will clarify the points that he's mentioning and prove and explain why these points and his responses are adequate and sufficient. So because it is considered his more difficult and challenging work, it is usually studied at the end of his work. You see, in Islam, Islamic studies, there is curriculum. It's important. Just like you guys here in university have level year 1, 2, 3, right, 4, right? First year courses, second, up to fourth. You don't go to the fourth without a prerequisite, right? It's not allowed here. It's not permitted. Same with Islamic studies. There are prerequisites before you read a text and before you go to one subject over the other. A lot of people don't know that. And it might explain why sometimes your knowledge or your study might not be fruitful. So for the Shaykh al-Islam, we said, you begin with some of his smaller works, like Thalathat al-Usul, 3 fundamental principles, then Kitab al-Tawheed, then Kashf al-Shubuhat. So if you're wondering why we were reading Kitab al-Tawheed and it took so long, because you need that knowledge to finish with this one. Because if you know Kitab al-Tawheed, then you know when the doubts are mentioned, you know why it's not right. You know why that doubt isn't correct. Now it doesn't mean that nobody can benefit from it without doing this. Because remember, why did he write this book? He wrote it to respond to doubts and he sent it to the lay folk. So even anyone can benefit from the book. But the true benefit comes when you have that layered understanding. You have to have a multi-layered understanding. You need to know all the different variation of ways that this particular point may not be correct, or why it's not what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from us. So this book itself, in reality, is a tremendous book. And some people may also ask, why so much attention is given to Tawheed and Shirk? So this book is more about Shirk than Tawheed, but someone may ask, why Tawheed and Shirk so much? Haven't we studied this sufficiently? I mean, even this majlis alone, for more than a year plus, and before that even, we've been going on Tawheed and Tawheed. So somebody may say, we finished Tawheed. But that is not the way that the student of knowledge should be thinking. Tawheed is not something you complete except with the passing of your life with La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. When you pass away with La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah on your tongue, that's when you finish Tawheed. Because Tawheed itself is the da'wah. It is what Islam is based on. It's the foundation, and from there comes different branches. And I mention a benefit here because Shaykh Salih al-Shaykh also mentions that sometimes some students, they belittle those type of lessons. They say, we need something new, we need the different things. We need the hot topics, the nawazil, the new and brand new issues are complicated. Very few people understand. We want to know those things. And the problem with this is that's not how the Salaf al-Salih, they used to study. The way that they were able to interact with the more advanced secondary, subsidiary issues is because their foundations were rock strong, solid. And that's why if you want to be treading the path of the true Islamic knowledge, start with the usul before the furu'. Usul are fundamental issues and subjects, and then you work your way towards a subsidiary. Abu Ubaid Qasim Salam rahimahullah, one of the Salaf, Imam Ahmad's contemporary, he said, عجبت من ترك الأصول وطلب الفضول, or fusul. I'm surprised about the one who leaves off the foundational issues and instead is busy with the subsidiary issues. I mean, how can someone, for example, he's studying intensely fiqh of marriage, or maybe fiqh or the ruqya and jinn, but he doesn't know what tawheed and shirk is. It doesn't mean you don't study those subjects, but you begin with the foundations. So when it comes to tawheed, no one should think we don't need it. We all are in need of it. And that's what Shaykh Islam mentions a great benefit, that even in the book Al-Shubhat, Shaykh Islam Abdul Wahhaab actually addresses the people who think that this book is not necessary to be studied or is sufficient. He says, فَتُفِيدُ التَّعْلِيمُ التَّحَرُّزُ وَمَعْرِفَةَ أَنَّ قَوْلُ الْجَاهِلِ التَّوْحِيدُ فَهِمْنَاهُ أَنَّ هَذَا مِنْ أَكْبَرِ الْجَهْلِ وَمَكَائِدِ الشَّيْطَانِ. He says, you should be diligent in protecting and understanding this issue, and you should know the statement of the ignorant one when he says, Tawheed, we already understand it. Tawheed, we already understand it. He says, for this is the greatest of ignorance and the plots of shaitan. Some people may say, I already know Tawheed, I'm a Muslim. If that was the situation, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam wouldn't be teaching Tawheed 5 days before his death. And who can say they know Tawheed better than the Sahaba, radiyallahu ta'ala anhum, the students of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam? Until 5 days before his death, he's teaching them about grave worship. It's important. Or the fact that in Mecca, 13 years, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is teaching about what? فَعَلَمْ أَنَّهُ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ. No, there's no deity worthy of worship except for Allah. Allah tells him then to know it. Not just to tell people to know it. And it's 13 years in Mecca. So imagine, the need for Tawheed is utmost important. In fact, you may see we all need to know Tawheed and Shirk better, because it helps us to obey Allah better. And to prove this point in the most eloquent and most profound way, if someone were to ask us who is the champion of Tawheed that we can think of in our mind, no one will give a better answer than Ibrahim alayhi salam. Ibrahim is the Tawheed, the one who championed Tawheed in his life. He says himself, وَجُنُوبَنِي وَبَنِيَّ أَنْ أَعْبُدَ الْأَصْنَامِ. He was afraid of shirk. He said, oh Allah, protect me and my children from shirk. Ibrahim alayhi salam, he is the one who is the Khalil of Allah, the true champion of Tawheed. He says, وَجُنُوبَنِي وَبَنِيَّ أَنْ أَعْبُدَ الْأَصْنَامِ. Oh Allah, protect me and my family and my children and offspring from worshipping idols. One of the Salaf, Ibrahim al-Taymi, commenting on this verse, he says, who after that is safe from this trial? If Ibrahim alayhi salam is saying that, who after that is safe? Means imagine Ibrahim alayhi salam, he knows Tawheed. He knows Allah. He's been through trial and tribulation. He's still asking Allah. So these type of circles in reality are beautiful things to sit down and study. But also it helps us to understand how many Muslims may not have the proper understanding of the Tawheed. So when we study books like Kashf al-Shubuhat, our job then is to go and to do da'wah ila Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Added to this book, Kashf al-Shubuhat, it has many explanations. In fact, it has more than a dozen printed and audio explanations from scholars past and present. And we mentioned some of our lessons before. Any book which the scholars have explained in a number of books, or the number of explanations on a book, are indications of its value and its status. Means if scholars, for example, explain Bukhari in hundreds, maybe explanations, that means Sahih al-Bukhari is an important book. Or the ulama, they always do tafsir. Kashf al-Shubuhat has many explanations. Why? Because the ulama found this book to be of value. So of those explanations, we will be using Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen, the explanation of Ibn Uthaymeen. It's an orange and black cover. And so for those of us who wish to obtain this, they can buy it online. And if someone just wants the text alone without an explanation, they can find it online. You just type in Remove the Doubts PDF and you'll find it. So, but it's important to try to keep, if you are able to get an actual physical copy, for it helps you in your study. Added to this, some scholars have even versified this book. They put it into a poem version. And so that would be, the book will become easy for someone to memorize. One of those scholars is Shaykh Muhammad Al-Tayyib Al-Ansari. He died 1363 Hijri. And he wrote this in a poem version because scholars like to do this so it makes it easy to memorize. You know, poetry has this particular value in that it's sweet on the ears and the tongue. Easy to memorize, beautiful to listen to. But when he compiled the work, he called it Barahin al-Muwaddahat fi Nadam Kashf al-Shubuhat, in approximately 485 lines. Right, so it's a very long poem. I think approximately 24 pages or so. But in there, he quotes a beautiful line, praising the book and its value. He said, فَجَاءَ كِتَابًا حَجْمُهُ صَغِيرٌ لَكِنَّهُ فِي عِلْمِهِ كَبِيرٌ. He said, then he came, means Shaykh Islam Muhammad Ibn Abdul Wahhaab, with a book small in size, however it is great in knowledge. And that's why this is from the barakah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He has given to the Shaykh, that he can do something like this, where he writes something very small. It's literally a small treatise. It's not very long. But then the book becomes a textbook for studying and for people to continue to benefit. Added to this, some scholars have added additional doubts to the book to complete it. Amongst those are his grandson, Shaykh Sulaymaan, Shaykh. He added 4 other doubts on top of this. So if Shaykh al-Islam covers about 15, he adds 4 other doubts on top of it. From his own side, doubts that maybe the Shaykh didn't cover, but in his time are considered doubts, and he responded to them. In his book, Taysir al-Aziz al-Hamid, Volume 1, page 446 to 455. Now the book itself and the topic of doubts is very important. Shubuhat. Every Muslim should know how to counter shubuhat and the fact that shubuhat are dangerous. Shubuhat, doubts are dangerous. And before we talk about the dangers of doubts, the term kashf al-shubuhat, in Arabic language, kashf means to remove something. It's more than izala. It's more than that. It's to uncover something, literally reveal it. To remove that which is underneath it or covering it, and is concealing it. That's what kashf means. And in the Quran, the word kashf is used. إِن يَمْسَسْكَ اللَّهُ بِضُرٍّ فَلَا كَاشِفَ لَهُ إِلَّا هُوَ. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala were to touch you or to test you with some type of difficulty and calamity, none can remove it except for Him. So kashf means to uncover. And ash-shubuhat, it means doubts, but they are those things which look like truth, but they're not truth. Very important. Shubuhat, those things that resemble truth, but they're actually batil. And why are shubuhat dangerous? Not everyone knows what a shubuhat is. Not everyone knows shubuhat. When something's a doubt. Only the people who have something of knowledge or who ask about it can be clarified, what's right from wrong. Many of us remember the famous hadith in Hadith Nu'man bin Bashir radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم إن حلال بين وإن حرام بين وبينهما أمور مشتبهات. Well, that's important. These are important hadith come back to us. Verily the halal is clear and the haram is clear. Between them what? Ambiguous affairs. لا يعلمهن كثير من الناس. Most people don't know it. That's a shubha. When something looks like it's right but you're not sure. And the dangers of shubhat is that if you do not get them dispelled, they can lodge into your heart and misguide you. And it's important. Shubuhat fil aqidah. Doubts in aqidah. Shubuhat fil fiqh. In fiqh. Shubuhat fil manhaj. In your methodology as Muslim. Shubuhat in many things. Even you can have doubts regarding Allah's existence. These are doubts. Every doubt when it comes, you must get it dispelled before it lodges into your heart or overcomes you. And the methodology of the scholars was always to help the lay folk or anyone who had doubts to remove them. So this is something which is prophetic. This is the tradition of the Sahaba. Whoever had doubts, they helped them to remove them. So very, very important. No one should think their heart and themselves to be strong against doubts. قال Imam al-Dhahabi. Imam al-Dhahabi, Hafid al-Dhahabi rahimahullah, the great historian, he mentioned a beautiful statement. He said, الشبهات خطافة والقلوب الضعيفة. The hearts are weak and doubts are snatching. Doubts in nature, they snatch you, and the hearts are weak. So when you hear a doubt, sometimes it can just pierce through your heart and make you doubt. Do I even know what I'm doing is right? And that's why when doubts arise, we need to immediately get them treated. And the only way to treat them is with ilm al-nafi', beneficial knowledge. Either that which you possess or others can possess for you. Now as a methodology, Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, the people of truth, we don't teach people, advocate, or build our deen based on doubts. Rather, we build our deen based on certainty. Who builds their deen based on doubts and ambiguous affairs? The people who are not upon guidance. Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen rahimahullah said, اتباع الشبهات داء مبتدعة وأهل الأهواء والخصومات وكثير ما يجتمعان. He says that following ambiguous and doubtful matters is a disease of those who have fallen into innovation and misguidance. It is a disease of the people of innovation and misguidance, because when a doubt comes, you don't follow the doubt as a way to establish something's halal. For example, someone will say, well, why do you know, or how would you know this is halal? You bring something doubtful and say, well, this shows that maybe it's not halal, haram. That is not origin. When you need to know something is clearly halal or haram, we need clear evidences. It's very important. وَأَمَّا الَّذِينَ فِي قُلُوبِهِمْ زَيْغ. Allah says, for those who have doubts in their heart and deviation, فَيَتَّبِعُونَ مَا تَشَابَهَ مِنْهُ. They follow that which is ambiguous. So very important. Sometimes shaitan will come and beautify a doubt so that you may actually think it's something which is allowed to do. You may even use as evidence the fact that there's a doubt existing. Some people say it's like this, whereas other people say that's enough to show that there could be possibility of it being permitted. No. You need to have clear proofs. And then, what happens when the doubts become prevalent? They end up misguiding people, and sometimes the return back to truth is not guaranteed. Only Allah guides whom He wills, and only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can assure that. So to expose yourself to doubts is dangerous. So some of the Sahaba, when they were confronted with the doubts, they challenged them. Some of you probably know the famous debate between Ibn Abbas radiyallahu ta'ala anhuma and the group of the Khawarij, the rebellious sect, who were fighting against the Sahaba. He went to them and he debated with them, and he bring forth all your doubts you have against the Sahaba radiyallahu ta'ala anhuma. They brought forth 3 major ones. He brought evidence against all of them. About 1,500 in Maytoba right there. This is ilm, how it works. Right? The rest of them, they were stubborn, and they ended up fighting against the Sahaba after even being guided. Another narration mentions that one of the tabi'een, his name is Yazid al-Faqir. One day, him and his group were going out for Hajj. And they were planning, after they come back from Hajj, to go on to make a revolt against the Muslim rulers. So on their way, they met Jabir ibn Abdullah radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, the Sahabi. And he sat with him, and he was discussing narrating a hadith, as he is a narrator of hadith, from the top 5. And he began narrating some of the hadith And he was talking about people who were going to be removed from the hellfire and go to paradise. And this group, they had doubts about that. So when they interjected, he explained, and at the end of the conversation, he cured their heart. They went back and they stopped the revolt. هكذا علم, ikhwan. That's how knowledge is. Perhaps he didn't even know what they were planning. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guided them with knowledge. They exposed that which they had with them, and then He brought forth the truth. قَدْ جَاءَ الْحَقِّ وَزَهَقَ الْبَاطِلِ. Truth has come and falsehood has been destroyed. إِنَّ الْبَاطِلَ كَانَ زَهُوقًا. Verily, falsehood is truly destroyed. So one thing to do, if you have something in your heart or doubts about something, you don't let it just sit inside of yourself, for it may overcome you. What you do is you go to somebody who you trust who might have more knowledge and say, can you explain this to me, please? Or I'm having a confusion, let's discuss it. Because that's how knowledge helps cure the doubts, and doubts don't just stay there. We'll conclude also by mentioning doubts. Why do they arise in the first place? Why would they even be doubts? In this case, why would Shaykh al-Islam have to even write a book against someone who has doubts? Why would someone have doubts? The ulama, they say, the scholars, that doubts can be rooted in three causes. Three causes. Number one, poor understanding. Su'u fahm. Someone has bad understanding of a particular verse or hadith or a particular principle or aspect in the deen. Could be the seerah, could be history, could be the foundations of the religion. And because of this poor understanding, they end up getting confused. So maybe they read the Quran, which is very good, but they understood it wrongly. Or they understood it in a way that it's not the most correct way, and then they got confused. So poor understanding could have been one of the causes of doubts. And if you were to actually analyze a lot of the doubts, even the doubts presented by the disbelievers, the non-Muslims or the Orientalists or whoever, you find that it's su'u fahm. It's based on misunderstanding. They didn't understand the text the way it was intended to be understood. Because when we study something, we need to make sure we study it in the way that it should be studied, understood. Not superimpose something into it. So sometimes it could be just by accident. You misunderstood something, I got confused. And then someone explained to me and say, oh, subhanAllah, I misunderstood the ayah altogether. Number two, a lack of knowledge. Adam ilm. Someone has a lack of knowledge. You see, not everybody is knowledgeable about their faith, or at least the basics, or more advanced knowledge. So sometimes, because we don't know much about something, we get confused. You can have a doubt. Example, the compilation of a hadith. Some people have a hard time understanding how Imam Bukhari, rahimahullah, who lives in the 2nd century, and he compiled hadith of Rasulullah 200 years after him. I don't understand that. The reason why they don't understand because they don't know the details of how Imam Bukhari did it. If you had more knowledge, it becomes easy to see that Imam Bukhari wasn't just pulling the hadith directly from Rasulullah. He had a sanid, he has changed the transmission, and a whole full-fledged methodology and criteria. So lack of knowledge sometimes is the biggest cause of doubts. For example, somebody may be also confused about terminologies and their meanings. What is tawassul? What does it mean? Why is it wrong to ask the dead? Some may not understand it. I'm not asking them, I'm asking them to ask Allah. How does that wrong? So lack of knowledge could make you think, it could make you also confused. So the more you gain knowledge, the more the things become clear to you. Lastly, which is the most dangerous of them, bad intentions. Somebody may even just have su'ul qasad. He has a bad intention. It's not that he doesn't understand, he's just misguided. He wishes to expose people to his opinion or her opinion, which in reality has no foundation in Islam, but they think they found something. You see, not everybody who propagates Islam sometimes has the best of intentions. Wallahu a'lam, Allah only knows. But sometimes it could be the reason why somebody will even go to that extent. So we'll give you an example. Some of the things that people they do, or they may say, if you can't find that they have poor understanding, or they might not have a lack of knowledge because they seem to be knowledgeable about what they're saying, sometimes it might be bad intention. Or it could be a combination of one of the three. It's not always that one over the other, it could be all three of them. But we should always be careful with our intention, because if we're sincere, Allah will guide us. That's one reason. If you really don't understand something, ask Allah to guide you and be sincere. For Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guides those who are sincere. And this is one thing we need to be careful of, that some people may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us all from, they may not have the correct intention. And to advocate, to clarify that, the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he spoke about in the end of times, there will be people calling to people to Islam. He said, Du'at ila abwab jahannam. Subhanallah. Sometimes something so hard to understand. Callers to the gates of the hellfire. How can somebody be calling to the gates of the hellfire? Sometimes it might just be ignorance, but some people maybe they've been trialed with these type of ideas, and they're misguiding others. So as a Muslim, when doubts come, we need to make sure that number one, we try to go to people who can help us understand it, and we need to be careful of the causes of doubts, because the causes of doubts are one reason why people might be having a lot of doubts. And I would say, in our era today, it might be mainly because of the lack of knowledge. That seems to be the most glaring of all of them, because people are not very knowledgeable of Islam, but there's hope. Ilm can be acquired, alhamdulillah. We can all study. Otherwise, we'll be doomed to our doubts. And this is why Islam comes to clarify the doubts, establish things upon certainty. So this is a muqaddimah, introduction to this book, which inshallah later we will actually study in detail, chapter by chapter. And these type of introductions are necessary because in reality, before you read a book, you must know it. Why are we studying it? Where did it come from? Who wrote it? What is its objectives? I also advise the Muslims in general to make it part of their daily habits to study the foundations of Islam. Because in our era today, people are not talking about the subsidiary issues only. There's even doubts in relation to the foundations. People are doubting about the foundations, things that we would take for certainty. That the Quran is a miracle, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists, that Islam is a true religion, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is a prophet and messenger. These are foundations, but some people may have doubts. So the more we study the usul of the deen, studying Tawheed and Shirk, and studying Quran, ulum al-Quran, sciences of the Quran, studying about the ghaib, the unseen, like what happens on the day of resurrection, these will increase our iman and also give us the ability to answer some of those doubts to yourself before others. For you have to make sure that yourself are upon certainty. And I'll close with the point. All of us who ever studied the term or the kalima, La ilaha illallah, we remember that one of the foundational criteria and conditions for La ilaha illallah is what? Yaqeen, knowledge and certainty. You have to have certainty. And certainty comes with knowledge. So you see how important Islam puts on certainty, because without it, you're going to be walking around with shak. إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا بِاللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ ثُمَّ لَمْ يَرْتَابُوا. The believers truly are those who believe in Allah and Messenger, then they do not doubt. They don't have doubts. And when the doubts come, alhamdulillah, in this book we will learn how to deal with them. Insha'Allah ta'ala. We'll end with this much. If anyone has any questions or points or something they want to add, inshallah they can do so.
What did Ibn Taymiyyah say?
So Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, I quoted him as saying, اتباع الشبهات داء المبتدعة وأهل الأهواء والخصومات وكثير ما يجتمعان. That following doubts is the disease of those who fell into innovation and misguidance, and often debating and disputing, and most of the times they all come together. You find them all together. You can find this in Iqtida as-Sirat al-Mustaqim, volume 1, page 121. Any other points?
What was the name of the individual? Can you repeat it? Whose doubt was being addressed in this?
So this book, he was addressing the doubts of a sheikh named Muhammad bin Abdullah Ibn Fayruz al-Ahsa'i. Ibn Fayruz died 1216 Hijri. He's the one who sent these doubts, circulated them, so he prompted Shaykh al-Islam to reply to them. And that's the work of the ulama, that when the doubts arise, their job is to repel them. And likewise us, inshallah, those who are, by Allah's permission, and inshallah, by Allah's bounty, will become the inheritors of this knowledge, that our job is likewise. Even here on campus, someone is saying something about Islam, we the Muslims should be the ones who, with good knowledge and hikmah, respond to it. We should not wait for anyone or the Muslims should be the ones responding bil ilm wal hikmah. So it's helpful to see the scholars, how they play their role, and us today in our capacity to do the same. Muhammad bin Abdullah bin Fayruz al-Ahsa'i. And if you read the works of A'immat al-Najd, you actually find that his name comes around a lot, actually. He was actually a known opponent of Shaykh al-Islam, and he actually has created quite a bit of fitna at his time period, even gravitating the rulers and the people in Baghdad against Shaykh al-Islam and tried to rally them up against him. So his fitna wasn't small, it was a big one. So he's amongst the top or the well-known opponents of the Shaykh, like in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protects his awliya and protects his supporters and the believers. And this is one thing also to remind us that opposition is something that always is there. Everyone who calls toward truth will always have someone who is adversary. Who's the best example? Prophets and messengers, alayhim salam. Allah says, جَعَلْنَا لِكُلِّ النَّبِيِّنَ عَدُوًّا مِنَ الشَّيَاطِينَ. Allah, is this ayah? من الشياطين? وَجَعَلْنَا مِنْ كُلِّ نَبِيٍّ عَدُوًّا من الشياطين من الجن مجرمين. نعم, that's the ayah. Allah says that we've made for every prophet an enemy from the criminals. Means that even if you're calling upon truth, somebody may oppose you. So it's not to be bothered by those who oppose you, as long as you're upon the correctness. And of course, do your best to try to guide them. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide us all.
Can you repeat the year?
He died 1216 Hijri, 10 years after Shaykh al-Islam, Muhammad Abdul Wahhab. Yes?
Which sect was Ibn Fayruz?
Ibn Fayruz was a Sunni, but we know from the region it comes from, Ahsa. Presently, it's more populated with different groups. But at that time, he was like a Sunni Muslim, but he had with him doubts regarding shirk, so he became like one of the promoters and advocates for shirk and things of this nature. Even though he was studied traditionally as a Sunni Muslim, but he had those doubts. Yeah.
And Ibn Ghannan, what year was he also?
So Ibn Ghannam, he died year 1225 Hijri. Ibn Ghannam. Any other questions? Other side? Okay.
Can you repeat the name of Ibn Bishr?
His name was historian Uthman ibn Bishr, 1290 Hijri. This is his work, Unwan al-Majd fi Tarikh al-Najd. Just to remind everyone, just to be patient with us, the first day we should be going through all these names and years and dates, and it becomes tedious, but this is important because when we study the book, we have to be academic about it, so then when we get into the book, inshallah, we can study it with ease. Any other points or questions? So inshallah, we advise the brothers and sisters to get the copy of the explanation. It will make their life easier and also be helpful to have in your library. And perhaps what could be done as an easy way is to one person try to buy on behalf of others, and we can just distribute it and pay everyone back like that. That might be easier. Inshallah, we'll try our best also to get some copies and give it out. Any other questions? Or? No? طيب إن شاء الله بأن ودي سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.